This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery, your favorite daily sports podcast. I am Michael Rand. A lot to get to today in our 30 minutes together. Get Chris Hine, Star Tribune Timberwolves beat writer, on in just a little bit. But first, what did I miss? No games really last night among the local teams, but a couple of interesting moves that you might be maybe scratching your head at a little bit. So let me explain them here quickly as best I can. First, let's start with the Twins. They signed Matt Shoemaker to a 1-year, $2 million deal. And you're looking at Matt Shoemaker and you're like, why do they want a pitcher, starting pitcher in particular, who has such an injury history, right? I mean, this is a guy that's only pitched 18 combined games in the last 3 seasons and 32 in the last 4 seasons. And even before that, he was good. I don't know if we would call him great. His best year probably still his rookie season when he went 16-4. Very good rookie season, but he's been beset by injuries since then. So why does this make sense? Well, it's a low-cost move, first of all. It's first 1 year, $2 million. So if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And the other thing is, in looking at his injury history, I was interested to find out in Phil Miller's story in Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, that it's not like it's been one thing, and maybe that should be a red flag. To me, that's actually more of a comfort than anything else. You know, it kind of started in 2016 when he took a line drive off of his head. Terrible, awful. I remember that injury. Fractured his skull, had to have surgery to repair a hematoma. 2017, he had a compressed nerve in his pitching arm. That's troubling. 2018, he had some of that same problem. He had a tendon problem. 2019, he was off to a good start with the Blue Jays, but then he tore his ACL, and last year he had right shoulder inflammation. So kind of a variety of things have gone wrong for Matt Shoemaker. But to me, that should at least tells me it's not like an elbow that keeps getting hurt, or it's a recurring problem in one body part, I guess. The thing you should probably be encouraged by the most was 2019, when before he tore his ACL, he was 3-0, 1.57 ERA in 5 starts. Like if he can get healthy and get kind of past what seems like in some cases a lot of freak stuff. Of course, the arm stuff worries you, but as a low-cost flyer and someone who maybe has put all this behind him, and we'll see, it makes a certain amount of sense. Now, the Lynx, meanwhile, made what looked like a really lopsided trade not in their favor, right? On Monday, they traded Odyssey Sims, who was an all-star for them a couple years ago. They traded the negotiating rights to Tammy Fabenle. They traded 2022 draft picks in both the first and third rounds to Indiana for only a 2022 second-round pick. What kind of sense does that make? Well, basically, it is their bet on the future and the players they are acquiring. They need space under the salary cap. They've committed to acquiring Aerial Powers and Kayla McBride and Natalie Achanwa. Those players all in now. I think the Powers signing became official on Monday, so you got to have room under the cap to make those moves. So clearing up cap space, clearing up roster spots, remaking really the supporting cast and some of the prime players on this team with those moves. So that explains that, at least in my book. You look at it like you traded 2 players and a better draft pick plus a third-round pick for a second-round pick. What are you doing? Well, that's what they're doing, and we'll see if it pays off in what looks to be a very intriguing 2021 season for the Lynx.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
I'd like to welcome in Chris Hine right now. Chris covers the Timberwolves for the Star Tribune. He's very excited about the cold weather we've been having lately. He told me all about that in our pre-production meeting, how he's just been spending a lot of time in the great outdoors in Minnesota. Chris, really though, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Still holding up, in month 11 of isolation here in my apartment. Trying to hang in there as best we can.
We're going to make it through this. The I think the finish line is in sight. I can't see exactly where it is, but I feel like it's going to come into view at some point here in not too long. It'll get easier when things get nicer out. That's for sure. We're not here to talk about the weather though. We're here to talk about the Timberwolves and Karl-Anthony Towns. We've now seen 3 games back since he missed close to a month after the COVID diagnosis. Maybe just start with your impressions of his play in his return and how the Wolves have looked now that we're able to see at least a little bit of a sample size with their best player back.
Yeah, I think watching that game yesterday against Toronto, it really hits you just how differently defenses have to play against the Timberwolves when Karl-Anthony Towns is on the floor versus when he's not. How many times, if you watch that game, was he just swarmed when he had the ball, below the free throw line? It just seemed like Toronto's game plan was, okay, we're going to double him, triple him, make him give it up to somebody else and have somebody else beat us. And that creates open shots for guys like Malik Beasley, who had another 6 threes yesterday, and he had 7 in the game before. So you see the kind of attention that he commands on the offensive end just opens things up for everybody else, whether it's Beasley, whether it's Anthony Edwards, who has played well alongside Towns these last couple of games here, I think. So really the way opposing teams have to game plan and prepare defensively to play the Wolves just is so much different when he's on the floor.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think that was the first game he was back. Beasley didn't score in the first half, I think. And so they were still kind of figuring out like, okay, the spacing and how is he going to benefit from that? Because, really when Towns was out, he was, when both Towns and Russell were out for at least that stretch together, Beasley was certainly their most, reliable scorer. And maybe throughout this season, he's been kind of 1A to Towns' 1 when they've both been out there, just in his ability to, create space and hit those threes. He had 6 of them against Toronto, right? And he had, there was a game he had 7, I think. And that was kind of the game where he almost rallied them.
That was the game against Charlotte. Yeah. And the game against Dallas, he had a bunch as well. Yeah.
So, I think you're right that the spacing there is an interesting question. And then, of course, just Towns' gifts offensively on the court, wind-wise, and just kind of like, where he's at right now. How far do you think he has left to go until he's, more than 80 or 90% of himself?
Yeah, it's a tough question because part of that, I think there's 2 parts to that. One is the physical aspect. And I think physically, I think he's getting seems like he's getting pretty close to where he was, at the first 2 games of the season. But emotionally, mentally, I think that was pretty clear on Friday when you heard him talk about the COVID protocols that Charlotte had to go through Friday, where they lost 3 players in that game or before that game. And Towns said it spooked him to hear that news that Charlotte had to sit these 3 guys because of potential exposure to the virus. So mentally, emotionally, I think that's going to be a non-linear thing because there's going to be things that pop up during the season, given all that he has been through, that are just going to affect him. And, it's tough. And his candor throughout this process, I think is a reminder to everybody that, the physical effects of the virus may be gone. But the mental and emotional toll that this virus can have on you, especially if you've lost family members to it the way that he has, is not going to go away as easily, if at all, ever. So, from that aspect, I think that's going to be very much a work in progress the rest of the season, and a non-linear process of grieving and getting back out there on the floor and trying to do what you do, something that you once loved to do, and trying to find some sort of happiness in that is a whole different process.
Given all that, it's probably even more impressive what he's been able to do on the court in these 3 games. I think things make sense. I think, Friday was a good step, but I'd say Sunday was definitely, when you saw what they were able to do against the Raptors, who are a below 500 team this season, but still, a team with recent championship past, a team that is, hoping and vying to get into the postseason at least again this year, that has a lot of good players, that they were able to have all 5 starters in double figures. They put Jared Vanderbilt in the starting lineup. They're able to close out that game, even with Towns fouling out and things kind of looking like they could go sideways. Do you feel like the rotations and kind of how the roster is set, even without D'Angelo Russell healthy, and we'll get to that in a minute, do you feel like it makes sense right now? Like it seems like more of how they want to play now that Towns is back?
I think so. I think you're getting there, and you're seeing, playing time start to decrease for some of the guys who you might have penciled in for major minutes, like a Josh Okogie or a Juancho Hernan-Gomez. And Hernan-Gomez, had his own COVID issues to get through. But he's available to play now, and he's not playing much. So I think you're seeing right now that the meritocracy is kind of shaking out. It can be a slower process, especially when, you're trying to trust young guys who maybe haven't been in these roles before. But, here's Jared Vanderbilt on the floor playing major minutes starting. There's Jaden McDaniels on the floor guarding Pascal Siakam when the game is on the line.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're seeing these young players start to get these major roles and be relied on in clutch situations to come through. And that's not something that you might have seen late December, early January.
I like the word meritocracy. That was interesting because you're right. It has been a lot of the veterans that have seen their playing time go down. I mean, Josh Okogie is a young veteran still. It's his 3rd year, but
we haven't seen Ed Davis at all.
I haven't seen much of Jake Layman in the last few days, even though he had a decent run, I thought, of a few good games in there. It has been more of, especially with Russell out, it's been, Jordan McLaughlin, it's been Naz Reid, whose role has gone down a little bit now that Towns is back, but still, being counted upon. It's the guys you just mentioned, Vanderbilt and McDaniels, and then Jalen Noel, like it's the rookies and the G League guys from last year, and that have been kind of forming a pretty good second unit, and sometimes this closing lineup because of their length and their athleticism and kind of their willingness to kind of put it all out on the line in some regards.
Yeah. And I think when you look at what some of these guys bring to the table, like a Vanderbilt or McDaniels, there's a defensive edge to the way that they play that is not present on the roster, especially with some of the guys we mentioned, like Hernan-Gomez or Layman. These guys take defending, and not to say others don't take it seriously, but defending is a big part of their games right now. McDaniels, you still see some rookie mistakes out there, but the athleticism and I think instincts that he has, especially as it pertains to shot blocking, is something that nobody else on this team has right now. And that's why he's on the floor guarding Pascal Siakam with the game on the line. And they're bringing it every night. They're just adding something to the mix that was missing early in the season. And I think that's why you're seeing some of these guys creep up in minutes, and deservedly so.
Wolves Twitter, bless Wolves Twitter, and I've fall victim to it sometimes myself. I am an active member sometimes of Wolves Twitter, would love all these young guys to play every single minute, to the point that it's been
play 8 or 9 of them at a time, right? Just throw them all out there.
But seriously, but they, here's a text. I sent you a text, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. It was like, who would you rather, if you could have a line, who would win in a scrimmage with the 5 guys I mentioned, Reed, McLaughlin, McDaniels, Vanderbilt, and who's the 5th one? Ant. Yeah, of course, Ant. Maybe Noel. There's your 6th man. Yeah. And then, against the typical, what would have been the starting 5 at the start of the year. So, Russell, Towns, Beasley, Okogie, and Hernan-Gomez. Who do you like in that game?
I still like Towns and Russell, because I still think that second group would have trouble defending, and the second group would also have a little more difficulty scoring, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Those guys, outside of Jalen Noel, or if Ant was on that group. But even then, like, that's like one of them, and McLaughlin would be like the only offensive option. So I still would take as much as you might want to write about wanting to take that second group and have them win, I think realistically, you still got to take that first group.
I agree. It's strangely tempting, not in a realistic way, but it I guess maybe it more underscores the theme of the year, which has been the surprising emergence maybe of some of these Iowa guys and some of these younger guys, especially McDaniels, and the relative disappointment. The Towns disappointment is obviously much different. He just hasn't been able to be on the court as much. And the D'Lo disappointment is, part availability, part what we've seen when he's been on the court, but a lot of that's been without Towns. But it's kind of this kind of dichotomy between the kind of the emergence of some of these young guys and the relative disappointment of a lot of the older players that has kind of narrowed the gap between what you would imagine to be their bona fide first five, and then kind of what would largely be kind of an afterthought group aside from Edwards.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing about evaluating the season, though, is that you mentioned the D'Lo disappointment. Part of that has to do with Towns not being available, and it's like, how can you draw any definitive conclusions about how D'Angelo Russell or anybody else really fits into this team long term for the rest of this season and moving forward if Towns isn't on the floor playing with them, because that figures so much into how the Wolves want to operate moving forward. Now that he's actually back, we're able to see some of these things. We're able to see how Malik Beasley is getting open shots and hitting them at a very good rate when Towns is drawing defensive attention away from him. We're seeing him and Anthony Edwards develop some chemistry, operating off the pick and roll late in games. So you're starting to see some of these things that we were waiting to see come to fruition. Now we have to see when Russell gets back, and unsure when he's going to be back at this point. We have to see what happens when he and Karl finally get to play more than 2 games in a row together.
Yeah, and that remains a frustration, right? I mean, and I was looking back at D'Lo's years before this one, and one of the underrated parts of Andrew Wiggins, who we couldn't wait to run out of town, and I certainly was among them, was that he, you may not have always loved him when he was on the court, but he was durable.
He was on the court, yes.
Yeah, D'Lo has not really been durable in his career, even beyond this year. I know he had a season where he played 80 games. He had another one where he played 81. Other than that, it's been kind of nicks and scratches, 20 games here, 30 games there, and has missed in a season. So I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy here, but I think the bigger picture is, what do he and Towns look like together? And, once he is healthy, how does that impact, some of the other positive things that they have going? Because even at his best, he's not a plus defensive player. It's more kind of what's that pick and roll going to look like, and what can that do for an offense, at the start of games, at the end of games in particular.
Yeah. And that changes the dynamic of different things too. I don't think it affects Beasley as much when Russell comes back, because I think Beasley's role will still be playing off the ball, trying to get open, finding that open space off of Russell and Towns. But I'll be interested to see how Russell's return impacts Edwards, especially because we have been seeing him and Karl operating that little pick and roll the last couple games here, and just the number of touches that Edwards has gotten as a result of Russell being out, I feel like has gone up as well. So that'll be what I'm going to be keeping an eye on once Russell eventually does return, is how does this impact Edwards, whether Edwards gets more time maybe with the second unit where he can be more of the creator, initiator, so that when he is splitting time with Russell and Towns, when he might not get the ball as much, like that'll be his time to fill up the stat sheet a little bit. So how Edwards is used, I think, is going to be important to watch going forward.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see too. Does Jaden McDaniels, does his role continue to evolve? Would they ever consider moving him into the starting lineup, or do his minutes stay as long as he's doing the things he's doing? I just look, he's been a plus player in 7 of the last 9 games, and the Wolves are 3-6 in those games. So it's not like he's doing this for a great team. Good things tend to happen when he's on the court, particularly defensively, and he and Vanderbilt on the court at the same time give you some flexibility with guarding positions, and
they're a little limited offensively, but it's almost like the second unit they throw out there sometimes is holding serve by limiting the opponent, not by matching them basket for basket, which is kind of different than a lot of other second units operate, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it is more defensive oriented, and I think there were stretches in yesterday's game where I was looking at the scoreboard. I'm like, the scoreboard hasn't moved much in a while, or there hasn't been a lot of scoring over this stretch for either team.
Yeah,
and I think that's what you're looking for out of that second unit as currently constructed. Russell's on the way back. Jared Culver will be back at some point. Remember him?
Yeah, barely.
He's still on the team. He's still on the team, and he'll be back, somewhat soonish. At least that was the initial timetable on his injury. So still a lot of things to answer, because Karl's return throws a lot of things into flux, and what you were evaluating the first 25 or so games is not what you're going to be evaluating the next 25 games when assuming Karl plays most of those games.
Yeah, and that's kind of leads to the last question I have for you. Like, if you're a Wolves fan, you're sitting there, they're 7-20. I think that's a disappointment to them. It's a disappointment to fans, even if they understand, the why of it. A lot of close losses, Towns out. This was definitely not the plan this year to be 7-20 at this point. What's with Towns back, presumably healthy for the foreseeable future? You imagine the Russell injury, even though they classify it as kind of a day-to-day ongoing monitoring, it doesn't seem like it's going to be like a season-ending thing. I would imagine it's going to be kind of we got to watch it, and at a certain point, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, he returns. What's the ceiling is maybe the wrong word, but like if you're hoping that they can play at X clip the rest of the way, is it 500? Is it a little bit less than that? How do you reset expectations based on what you know about this team now?
I think if Russell gets back and you play 500 ball the rest of the year, I think I don't want to say you'd be ecstatic at that prospect, but I think you'd certainly be optimistic heading into the off season, assuming that's not good enough to make the playoffs, which it won't be.
No.
So I think 500 would be on the more optimistic end of things. I think I just look at it this way. When was the last time the Timberwolves had a winning streak of any kind? Like,
right.
you win 4 in a row, you win 5 of 6 or something like that. It's been a long time since they had a stretch that got people really excited. They've had some nice games here and there.
Yeah.
Like that game against Utah earlier in the year but it was just one game.
Right.
The one game that they had after they made the trades last year against the Clippers, that was just one game. That was preceded by a whole lot of losing. I think the last time they had a legit stretch like that was just after they traded Jimmy Butler for Covington.
They were 9-3 in that 9-3 in that 12-game stretch.
Yeah. That was the last time you ever kind of got excited for where this team might be headed. So just seeing maybe a couple stretches like that, it's a low bar. but
you put together a 5 out of 7 or something, like win 5 out of 7, then let's talk about what the expectations are.
Talk about right. So that's why I say a 500 streak you'd be maybe over the moon if that happened with everybody healthy.
Well, we'll see. They've got the Lakers Tuesday night. That's not really a way to start a winning streak, I don't think.
No, it's not. It wouldn't seem
so
to be.
The schedule isn't necessarily conducive. I feel one thing that hurt them a little while ago is, when they had kind of a more favorable stretch, I feel like they had a lot of people out, weren't able to take advantage of that. But I'm sure there are some spots in the schedule where they might be able to put together something as the season goes along. And, we'll just have to wait and see. As always with the Timberwolves, we will wait and see. Chris, great stuff. Thanks for joining the podcast today. Follow Chris, Star Tribune, startribune.com, at Christopher Hine on Twitter. And Chris, you're welcome anytime. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Savvy podcast listeners will remember that when you hear that sound, it is because I feel like a trade machine. Going back to the Kirk Cousins, I'm doing it. Okay, so this is less of a This is less of a here's what's going to happen and more of a I've come to this conclusion that if we get an inkling of any sort that the Vikings are interested in exploring a Kirk Cousins trade, that this team makes the most sense and not the other team. The other team in question here being San Francisco. You keep hearing, hey, why don't they trade him to San Francisco? The 49ers, Kyle Shanahan loves him. They need a quarterback, and that's true. However, here's what I've been thinking about Kirk Cousins lately. He's an established, above average quarterback. His body of work suggests not a quarterback that's going to take a team, though, probably to the next level. He got in Minnesota 2018, right? Year after they won 13 games, went to the NFC title game. He's probably thinking, everybody's probably thinking, more QB stability, better body of work than Case Keenum. Here's a guy that can take you over the top. Instead, the next 3 seasons, his first 3 seasons here, they won 8 games, 10 games, and 7 games. They made the playoffs one time. Not a terrible run, but not what anybody expected. And not all of that was his fault. Some of it was, though. He is instead a quarterback best suited to provide stability, I think, to an organization. So a team trying to trade for him should not be expecting to go from, like the cusp of the Super Bowl, to holding the Lombardi Trophy, to go from like really good to great. They should be expecting to maybe go from being bad to being credible. So there's not a lot of teams that necessarily fit that description, or at least that don't have a young quarterback that they're really locked in on and trying to develop. But there is one very interesting team to me, Denver. Broncos have won an average of 5.8 games the last 4 seasons. They've been getting pretty inferior quarterback play from the likes of Trevor Siemian, old friend, Case Keenum, old friend, Joe Flacco, and Drew Lock. And they say they're committed to developing Lock. There's not much, though, that we saw last season that makes you think this guy is the QB of the future. It's a 2 to 3 year bridge, maybe even a longer-term solution. Cousins would make a lot of sense in Denver. And Denver did pursue Kirk Cousins in 2018 when he was a free agent. And Denver just did hire former Vikings assistant GM George Payton to be their executive in Denver. So the pieces are in place. Broncos have the number 9 pick in the draft. That's maybe a high price, but maybe they can figure this out. If and only if the Vikings got interested in this, boy, they'd have the 9 pick and the 14 pick if they could work that out. That's a lot of draft capital for doing a lot of different things, whether you want to go after Deshaun Watson, whether you want to try to move up and draft one of those top quarterbacks. All in all, though, the point of this is that I think Denver, or a team like Denver, makes a lot more sense than San Francisco or a team like San Francisco if a trade ever materializes. Let's finish quickly with the cooler. The Wild will be back on the ice Tuesday night in Los Angeles, but defensively you might not recognize them. This was shocking, at least to me. I haven't been following this quite as closely, but reading from Sarah McClellan's story in today's Star Tribune. Read her work, Star Tribune, startribune.com. I'll have her on the show later this week. Jonas Brodin, Brad Hunt, and Carson Soucy are still in the COVID protocols as of Tuesday morning. Ian Cole just came off the list Monday, but he is not expected to play Tuesday. Jared Spurgeon also still out with an upper body injury. Well, that's a lot of defensemen. They've called up a lot of reinforcements from the taxi squad, including this 20-year-old Kalen Addison, who apparently has some pretty sick flow, a nice mullet to show off. So it could be a little bit ragged. Maybe they'll play on adrenaline in this first game, these first few games back, but give the Wild a little bit of grace, I would imagine, as they try to come back from these COVID protocols. That will do it for today. I'll be joined tomorrow by Lavelle E. Neal III for some Twins talk and some good stuff coming up later in the week as well. Thanks always for listening. Download, subscribe, write a review. The haters said you would never write a review, but I believe in you. I think you can do it. Thanks for joining me here today on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand.